another Aleph with Beth episode. This episode concerns chesedh. Chesedh. That's how I pronounce that Hebrew word up on the screen. The King James Version translates it as lovingkindness. When one engages with both apologetics and counter-apologetics, one can begin to sniff out a person's theological background. I mentioned before how Andrew and Bethany are Calvinist-Extremists. They recommend Calvinist-Extremist writings from the likes of Piper Desiring God. They recommend those Calvinist-Extremist works. They hang out with Calvinist-Extremists like Andrew, like Mark Ward. Ward, incidentally, is an Irish name. I think it comes from Mac on Bharge, and Mac on Bharge in Irish Gaelic means son of the bod, and certainly Mark Ward looks Irish. He has that pale skin, freckles and red hair, so Mark Ward certainly looks Irish, but Mark Ward is a Calvinist extremist, and Andrew Chase hangs out with Mark Ward. And one thing that Calvinists love to do is to contract covenants with their fictitious deity. I was reading The Faithful Tribe, and The Faithful Tribe is an account of the Orange Order by Ruth Dudley Edwards. Now, Ruth Dudley Edwards, like myself, would be an ethnic Irish Catholic. Neither Edwards nor I would believe in any of the supernatural claims of Roman Catholicism. However, ethnically, we are Southern Irish Catholics. Edwards might reject the name Catholic, but I don't. I call myself both an ethnic and a cultural Irish Catholic. Why do I do this? Well, to distinguish myself from the Scots-Irish or the British-Irish or the Ulster-British, as David Trimble put it. They are ethnically Protestant, and most of them are just ethnically Protestant. I was reading another book on the Orange Order by Brian Kernhan, and he said that to join the Orange Order, one must be a regular member of a church. However, he says that in Belfast, hardly anybody goes to church, hardly any Protestant goes to church, and yet membership in the Orange Order is quite high in Belfast. And just incidentally, I was reading in it was a Catholic nationalist extremist newspaper called the Hibernian more than 10 years ago, but they made a big deal about Belfast being pronounced on the second syllable. They say it's Belfast and not Belfast, and incidentally, that is how Christopher Hitchens often pronounced it. Listen to Christopher Hitchens, and he has this thing where he lists cities beginning with B that were ruined by religion, and very often he calls Belfast Belfast, because Christopher Hitchens spent quite a while in Northern Ireland as a journalist. He discusses this in Hitch 22, his memoirs, his autobiography of sorts. However, so in Belfast, there are lots of orange men, and yet these orange men never go to church. So a lot of people in Northern Ireland, a lot of Ulster Protestants are Protestants really culturally and ethnically. They don't go to church. They probably don't believe in any of that stuff. And, it is useful to distinguish myself as an Irish Catholic, in distinction to the Scots-Irish or the Ulster-British. I hold to the two nations theory. I think there are two nations in this island, the British Irish and the Irish Irish. I'm Irish Irish, and one of those distinctions is, in my view, a cultural Catholicism. However, Protestants can be Irish Irish and Catholics can be British Irish. That's a bit of a digression, but covenantal theology plays a huge role in the history of both Ireland and, after partition, Northern Ireland. Ruth Dudley Edwards describes a covenant as kind of like a two-way contract. If I do something for you, then you must do something for me. However, if one side backs out of the contract, then the contract is null and void. And the Latin word for covenant is foedus, and we get the word foederalis, or federal, from this. And another Calvinist-Extremist in the United States is a fellow called Douglas Wilson. Douglas is a very Scots-Irish name. I think it means Douglas in Gaelic. And Wilson, in Northern Ireland, there are quite a lot of Wilsons. So Douglas Wilson, of course, has to have Scots-Irish ancestry, and he plays this up a bit because he calls his church Kirk, and Kirk is the Ulster Scots word for church, or the Scots word for church. He calls his college New St. Andrew's College. St. Andrew, of course, is the patron saint of Scotland, and I think St. Andrew's College is actually one of the best universities in the world. It could even be higher in international ranking tables than both Oxford and Cambridge. So he called his college after both the patron saint of Scotland and one of Scotland's most prestigious universities, indeed one of the world's most prestigious universities. Indeed, I think that the Prince of Wales, Prince William, he studied there. He got a degree at St. Andrews University in Scotland. But covenantal theology is extremely important in Irish history because the Covenanters took this covenantal theology out of the Bible. In the Bible, God will do this for Israel if Israel does this for God. Usually that entails being super holy and not going near the gods of heathenry. However, God always fails his end of the bargain. None of God's promises in the Old Testament comes true. God says to Abraham that he will get all the land that he sees. And I don't think that Jewish people have ever controlled that land. I think that land that God promised Abraham, arguably it stretches from the Nile to the Euphrates. And I think that in the book of Samuel, the fictitious character Solomon controls an empire that large, but as Hector Avalos points out, there's no evidence that this empire ever existed. So that's one promise that God didn't fulfill, and God never fulfills really any of his promises. And so the theology of covenant was concocted. The reason why God didn't uphold his end of the bargain is because the Israelites just weren't holy enough. Although the gods of the heathens never seemed to mind how holy they were. The gods of the heathens gave the heathens empires and kings and booty, and they didn't really care how holy they were. So it's incoherent nonsense. Another promise that God does not fulfill is that the scepter shall not depart from Jesse until Shiloh comes. And I think Shiloh is a word that we aren't exactly sure how to translate. I think Christians translate it as Messiah. So they say that the rod will not depart from the Davidic lineage until Jesus comes, but that is demonstrably false. I mean, the Davidic kingdom died out. I think even after Solomon, the kingdom split in two, and the northern kingdom was destroyed and assimilated by the Assyrians, and then the Judean kingdom was sacked by the Babylonians. So this promise was not upkept, but covenantal theology was invented to explain this. The reason why God did not uphold his end of the bargain was because the Israelites were not just holy enough. And so, as silly as this covenantal theology is, it was eventually secularized in Scotland. In Scotland, the nonconformists had a covenant with the king, conditional loyalty. The Scottish Calvinist nonconformists said to the king that we will be loyal to you for so long as you give us a Presbyterian church in Scotland. If you try to impose either Anglican Episcopalianism on us or Roman Catholicism on us, then that covenant, that two-way contract is broken, and we will rebel and set up our own independent Scottish nation. And those ramifications continue to this day. The Church of Scotland is still the established church of Scotland has an established church. England has an established church. Wales does not. Ireland or Northern Ireland doesn't have an established church either. But the Church of Scotland is today the official established church of Scotland. And when Queen Elizabeth II died, King Charles, I think the third, he had to take an oath to uphold the true religion of Scottish Presbyterianism in Scotland, which I think is an anachronism, but there you go. So this covenantal theology eventually came over to Ireland because most of the Irish British, or the British Irish, or the Ulster British, as David Trimble put it, I think that the most accurate term would actually be Northern Irish British, because Ulster is a contested term. The official name of Northern Ireland is Northern Ireland, so I think that Northern Irish British would be the best designation for the British Irish nation on this island. And so this covenantal theology eventually came over to Ireland with the planters, the Scottish Presbyterians that James I of England planted Ulster with. And incidentally, I live in a county in Ulster, but not in Northern Ireland. County Monaghan. County Monaghan is in Ulster, but it's not in Northern Ireland, it's in the Republic of Ireland. But Monaghan, for some strange reason, was never officially planted, but yet it is an extremely Protestant county. The centre of town has a diamond, which is, a sign that this town is Protestant. In the centre of town, there's the courthouse and the Anglican church, and the Anglican church at that time would have been the established church. So Monaghan is an extremely Protestant town, and so is Clones, but I don't know why. Monaghan was never officially planted, but somehow Protestants settled here in large numbers. Anyway, so this covenantal theology came over to Ireland with the Presbyterians, and one of the things that occurred was the establishment of the Orange Order. I think that William of Orange was a Calvinist. He came from Holland, which is extremely Calvinist. Indeed, one famous Calvinist church is the Dutch Reformed. The Dutch Reformed were the church of most people, most whites in South Africa. So I think, and one could also be an Anglican and be a Calvinist, because I think one of the 39 articles is Calvinistic predestination. So being an Anglican did not necessarily mean that one was not a Calvinist. So this covenantal Calvinistic theology came over to Ireland, and in Ireland, in Armagh, the Orange Order was set up. And one of the things that the Orange Order has is conditional loyalty. The Orange Order are loyal to the British monarch for so long as the British monarch is a Protestant. And if the British monarch ever renounces Protestantism or becomes a Roman Catholic, then the Orange Order will no longer be loyal to that monarch. And Calvinistic covenantal theology also led to the creation of Northern Ireland. This is one of the reasons why I have a love-hate relationship with Calvinism. On the one hand, I think that Calvinism is silly and cruel, but on the other hand, I think that secular Calvinism, as it were, has achieved a great deal. Once Calvinism is secularized, nations can be founded, and one of the nations that was founded was Northern Ireland, because in imitation of the covenant that the Scottish Presbyterians made, Carson, I think Sir Edward Carson, dreamt up the Solemn League and Covenant, and the Solemn League and Covenant essentially expresses conditional loyalty. The Protestants of Ireland will be loyal to the British monarch and to Westminster for so long as they do not impose home rule on Ireland. And Ruth Dudley Edwards, in her book, she explores this, and that covenantal mentality in her mind persists to this day. Protestants in Northern Ireland are conditionally loyal to Westminster, conditionally loyal to Great Britain. However, if an injustice occurs, or a perceived injustice, like Drumcree, like the Anglo-Irish Agreement, then all bets are off. Because loyalism is a paradox. One is loyal to the Queen or the King. However, one very often riots against and even sometimes murders the forces of the King, the forces of the Crown. And she's trying to explain this. How can one, on the one hand, be loyal to the King whilst at the same time being in open rebellion to the King's officers? And she explains this by way of Calvinistic Covenental Theology. And so, yeah, I just wanted to go on this bit of a rant about covenantal theology, and that Andrew and Bethany translate chesedh as loyal covenant, I thought was extremely interesting given the amount of loyal covenantal Protestants that Ireland has. Indeed, the second biggest religion in Ireland is Presbyterianism, which is a Calvinistic offshoot. John Knox set up Presbyterianism in Scotland. Indeed, the Irish Gaelic word for Presbyterian church is Aglish Albanach. Aglish Albanach in Irish Gaelic means Scottish church. And I think even in English, this came to be, people would refer to Scotch churches as Presbyterian churches.